Hi everybody, my name is Sky and this is my channel Nettlebooks, and today I'm going to be doing my March reading wrap up. So I read 7 books in the month of March and I actually had a really good reading month. I got through a lot more than I expected to. My goal was to do 1 book a week, so 4 books this month I think. And I did achieve that, so I'm really pleased and I'm going to share with you what I read this month. The first book I read this month was book 4 of Robert Jordan's epic fantasy The Wheel of Time series, and that is of course The Shadow Rising. I thought this was the best instalment of the series I have read so far. It was a very large book at over 1,000 pages, but I really loved it. There's a lot of changes in this book from the ones that came before it. We see a lot of changes in our characters and a lot of changes in the plot and the setting as well. The setting is extremely beautiful and well done in this book. But also we see a lot of changes in Robert Jordan's writing style, and he begins to really carve his own path in this series. It is just a great continuation and he's set up a lot of plots and hooks for the next book, so I'm really excited to get on with that. This was a great read. The second book I read this month was The Wake by Paul Kingsnorth. The Wake is a historical fiction novel set during the time of the Norman invasion in England, and we follow a character named Buckmaster and his experience with this. I did like this book. It really opened my eyes to a time in history I know very little about, and I've not read any historical fiction during this time period. Also, Paul Kingsnorth, he writes in a language he has developed called Shadow Tongue, which is his answer to Old English, and it makes it easier for the reader to consume and get through essentially. And I really did enjoy this aspect of the novel. It made it much more immersive in my opinion. I really felt like I was a stranger in this story, and sometimes when I read historical fiction set in Britain I don't feel like a stranger, but really I should, because I didn't live 100, 200, 1,000 years ago, and I should feel like it is a completely strange, obscure experience for me, and I really loved how Kingsnorth managed to achieve that. I also really loved the character of Buckmaster. He was so strange himself, and he has this internal dialogue with himself that kind of reminds me of the Gollum Smeagol dialogue. I just thought this book was really interesting. I would recommend picking that up if you are interested in reading that kind of thing. The third book I read this month was A Song for Arbonne by Guy Gavriel Kay, which is a historical fantasy novel. This is a standalone fantasy novel, and it is really commendable what the author has managed to achieve in such a short space of time. This novel could really stand up against series with multiple installments. Guy Gavriel Kay is really masterful in his use of language, and he knows when to make it flowery and when not to, and it's never overdone. He's also very good at dialogue, and in this novel he includes elements of politics, religion, combat, war, sex, passion, love. You have it all really, and it's all in there, and it still doesn't feel overwhelming, and I really love this novel. It was one of my favourite reads of the year, and I would totally recommend picking it up. The fourth book I read this month was a memoir by Susanna Kazin, and it is Girl Interrupted. This memoir deals with Susanna's time while she was diagnosed and admitted into a mental health ward, and the book is very non-linear. It doesn't really have a plot, I would say, but instead we focus a lot on Susanna's reflections on her time there and the people she met, and also on her recovery, which I liked. It also deals with a lot of questions about how we diagnose people and the treatment, especially back in the late 60s when she was diagnosed. So this was a very interesting read. It was also very easy and quick to consume because it is a very short book. It was just 170 pages and the chapters were very short, and I really did enjoy it. It was definitely interesting and opened my eyes to a lot of subject matter I am not familiar with myself, and I definitely want to explore this further. The fifth book I read this month I got from the library, so I don't have it anymore, but it was The Pollack Prophecy by David Eddings. The Pollack Prophecy is the first in a 5-part series. This was definitely the weakest book I read this month. It didn't really add anything new to the genre of fantasy for me, and I was honestly expecting more because I've heard really good things about this series. While I did love Gary and the main character, I found him really sweet and loving, and there was a few other characters I thought were done quite well. I really think this book could have done with a bit more work on the plot and the character development, and also I think the pacing could have been a bit faster. It really didn't pick up until the end of the book. It did feel a little bit of a slog sometimes. It was a fun adventure, and I'm not saying I didn't like it, I just thought it could have been stronger. But saying that, I am going to pick up the next book in the series because I do want to give the series a fair chance. The sixth book I read this month was Radiance by Grace Draven. Radiance is a fantasy romance novel, and it was really fantastic. Not only is this a really good romance story, there is also really excellent world building and character development that adds to the romance rather than takes away from it, and I really enjoyed that. I always appreciate a really fleshed out, detailed world, and I think Grace Draven really did deliver that, and I wasn't expecting that at all, to be honest. The plot itself is also quite solid and does stand up on its own, I think, and I love how she has all these different elements and it's not just the romance. While that obviously is the main feature of the book, she does know how to write other things, and I think I was really surprised by this book, and I'm definitely going to be picking up the next one in the Wraith King series. The last book I read this month was a really emotional and powerful and moving read for me, and it is a historical fiction novel that was released this year in February, I think, and it is called The Seal Woman's Gift by Sally Magnuson. I adored this book. It was really moving and upsetting as well. I can't remember the year this was set in, but it was based on historical events of raids on Icelandic coastlines, and it took a lot of Icelandic people for slaves to the north coast of Africa. And this book specifically is inspired by a memoir written by one of these real life people called Oliver, who was a reverend. And when he was captured, he was then sent back to go back to his king and country and to seek a ransom for his people. But this novel gives a voice not only to Oliver, but also to his wife Åsta and their children, and what happened to them during this time when he was away. This was a very tasteful, very believable book, and I love how it gave a voice to Åsta, a woman, and it is also about the strength of these people. The book is also written really beautifully, and it incorporates a lot of Icelandic mythology. The mythology reflects the story at the time. It's done really well, essentially. It's not forced like a lot of books are, and that was also very good. Sally Magnuson has also done a lot of research into this book, and it does show, and it does make for some really good historical fiction if you do like things to be as accurate as possible. I think the purpose of this book was to give a voice to these people again, but specifically to Åsta and her children, and how she as a woman in this environment dealt with all of these horrible things happening to her, and it gave her a second chance, or maybe even a first chance, to tell her story. And I really think this book achieved that, because I am not going to forget these characters. This was really moving. I read it all in one night. I just could not put it down, but I was really upset for a day or two after I read it. I just think this book is really excellent, and if you are interested in anything I've said about this book, I would totally recommend picking it up, because it is a really amazing read and probably one of my favourite books of the year as well. I'm hoping my reading month will be this good next month, so thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video.